This is Gabe Ignetti, and this is the Ecomodernist Soapbox. With us today is pro-GMO activist and fellow ecomodernist Marc Brazeau. Marc is a former union organizer and the founder of Food and Farm Discussion Lab, a multi-project platform for exploring food and agriculture-related science and policy. He's also a senior agricultural columnist for the Genetic Literacy Project. He's written at length about technological innovation in farming and food production, and he's here to talk to us about agromodernism. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gabe.
What motivated you to get involved in the agricultural sciences?
As you said, I had been a union organizer, and then my next career was as a chef. And I started merging the political activist interests with the interest in food. Just got more and more interested in the policy aspects, and that takes you into the science as well, and just started writing about it from there. And then the center of that is GMOs and genetic engineering in agriculture.
You've coined the phrase agromodernism. Could you speak a little bit with us about that?
Yeah, agromodernism is just applying the principles of ecomodernism to food production. So looking at ways to use technology to intensify and decouple food production, lowering the environmental footprint and making room for more nature and feeding dense, livable cities.
You're writing a book right now. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, the book is going to be called The Ecomodernist Moment. And it's going to start with some history and try to boot camp them into understanding that if you're feeding cities, you're going to be doing industrial intensive agriculture. And that's been the case from Sumer and the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, Rome, the Mayan civilization through today. So the question is, and if we're going to do industrial agriculture, the question is what kind of industrial agriculture we want to have. And then I'll look at the various different types of technologies that are driving agriculture and food production forward.
Well, the concern with modern agriculture is basically how that fits in with the environment.
Intensive industrial production methods actually had smaller footprint. That's not to say there aren't huge challenges. Weed control is a great example. So there's nothing sustainable about pouring resources, and all that goes into weeds. So you want to control the weeds, and the most efficient way of doing that is with modern herbicides. The previous method in organic farming is tillage, where you try to interrupt the life cycle of the weeds before they can start growing. But the problem with that is then you've broken up the soil structure and it's made it vulnerable to wind and water erosion. The consensus in the scientific community on the safety of GMOs is higher than it is on climate science. Genetic engineering as a set of breeding techniques does not introduce any greater risk than traditional breeding. I mean, you can end up with unintended consequences in both. And in fact, there have been examples in traditional breeding. The papaya in Hawaii was one of the first commercially available genetically engineered crops, and that was in the early 90s. And that saved the Hawaiian papaya industry. That's where most of the world's papayas are grown. Some of the crops that are most vulnerable to disease are crops like you mentioned, banana, chocolate, coffee, grapes, citrus in Florida especially. Most crops that are susceptible to disease, you can break up that disease cycle with a crop rotation. But you can't do that with an orange grove or a banana plantation. Those are all plants where the easiest way is going to be genetic engineering.
So I would imagine that the hotter earths would also require some kind of genetic engineering to make the plants more adaptable.
Being able to address some of these breeding challenges on the fly is going to be a big deal. In Africa right now, they're trying to bring a combination of drought tolerant and water efficient maize, being able to produce crops that are able to withstand different sorts of stresses, whether it's flooding or drought or heat or salt. These are going to be really crucial to meeting the challenge of feeding a growing population on a crowded, increasingly inhospitable planet. The benefits are the equivalent of like taking 9 million cars off the road every year.
Okay, the BT is actually, from what I understand, it's a naturally occurring insecticide. Does that have effects on humans?
Everything is toxic at a given dosage. Caffeine or aspirin or vitamin D at a high enough dosage, it's a poison. The soil bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. What the bacteria does, it produces proteins that when consumed by various different little critters that eat crops, it binds to a certain receptor in their digestive system that we just don't have. So what they did was they bred corn and other crops to produce those proteins within their structure. When we eat that protein, we just digest it like any other protein. It only acts on the targeted pest and is essentially invisible to the rest of the environment and other critters that come in contact with it. One of the major GMOs is the Roundup Ready crops you see in corn and soybeans, cotton, alfalfa, sugar beets, and that interferes with a metabolic pathway in plants, so it disrupts photosynthesis.
Are you hopeful about the general public accepting GMOs and accepting the need for modern agriculture as well?
There's a lot that's wrong with modern agriculture and modern food production, but there's a lot that's right, and there's a lot that people don't understand about it. Am I hopeful about that? I am. One big reason why is that there's these gene editing technologies that are kind of the second or third wave of biotech and breeding. And the way they're being used these days, for the most part, is to skip a number of steps, but to produce more directly changes that could have occurred in nature, but would just take a lot of time and trial and error to get there. And I think that doesn't mess with people's sensitivities about messing with nature the way transgenics of taking the genes from one species and putting them in another. That's something you could have achieved in nature. You just did it much quicker. I think that's something that people are going to be more open to when you start saving the orange juice industry or wine and chocolate, make the benefits clearer to consumers.
The problems that there are with industrial agriculture, or is that endemic to farming? And if that is the case, is there any promise for getting better?
In some ways, farming to feed cities has never been sustainable. And that's what drove the imperialism of ancient Rome. They would farm their soils to depletion and then have to conquer new lands to bring the food back to the city of Rome. It's never been sustainable, and that was when there was a few 10 million people on the planet and 1 million citizens in Rome. It's not sustainable 2,000 years later, and yet here we are with 7 billion people that we're feeding. So as population rises, we just keep figuring out how to produce more on less land with less inputs. But the impact per mouth fed keeps decreasing. That's the only way we've been able to keep feeding more and more people. The question is whether we're going to be able to get all the way to the point of decoupling, where we can even start to reduce the impacts of farming as population continues to grow and as you get a growing global middle class. That remains to be seen.
Well, how can we learn more about your work?
Tune in to Food and Farm Discussion Lab website. That's FAFDL.org. I launched a Facebook forum, the Agromodernist Moment. We're going to be workshopping the book I'm working on and a couple other Facebook groups. And those are on a subscription model. It's $2 a month to participate, and you can sign up at patreon.com/FAFDL or paypalme.me/FAFDL. And I hope to see people in the forum, because we're, just covering really exciting stuff.
Well, Marc, we want to thank you for being on our show.
Thanks, Gabe. It was great being with you.
And we'd like to thank our viewers as well for joining us. We'll be seeing you till next time.